So today on the farm, we're going to be working a little bit closer to home. We have this really awkward grass patch between the driveway and the river rock overflow for the downspouts. And it's really just become an infestation of weeds, clover, etc. You can't really mow it because there's some tree roots running along the surface, which you can't see right now. But overall, just looks ugly, doesn't serve any functional purpose at the moment. So we're going to work on improving that. So today we're going to look to dig about 5 inches down, level this out a bit. May not be able to see it on the video, but there is a bit of a slope here. So we'll need to take that into consideration so that our paving stones sit flush. But we'll get it prepared for a 2 to 3 inch base level of gravel, followed by some sand, and then finally our paving stones. All right, I'm gonna get to work digging. All right, so a couple hours of digging and have it roughly dug out to about a depth of 5 inches. Next step is going to be to take a rake and level out any high spots. Also work with the downward slope a bit and get it ready for the gravel bottom. All right, so got it leveled off, worked with the slope a bit. Sprayed a layer of weed killer and herbicide for good measure to prevent any seeds that were in the ground from growing back. Also added a layer of commercial polymer weed protective fabric as well. Highborn, are you adding to the video? After the fabric was put down, added a couple of leveling lines to guide the depth of my gravel. So the gravel base itself ended up being about 2¼ inches thick. And then tomorrow I'll probably be looking to screed a 1 inch layer of sand. And that should bring us almost plumb for the paving stones, which are about 1 5/8 inches high. So been at it most of today, probably about 7 hours of manual labor here. Altogether, this little spot is roughly 100 square feet. It's about 10 feet by 10 feet, give or take. It is still pretty wet in the middle. We had quite a bit of rain the other night, so I feel like I need to let this sit and dry out a bit more before we add the sand and paving stones. All right, we're calling it a day. All right, farm family. So unfortunately, the audio here did cut out, so I'm attempting to do a voiceover with my iPhone. Let me know in the comments below if you're able to hear me okay. If you're not, I'll try to figure out a different solution going forward when this happens. But the following day, I drove to my local Home Depot store and I purchased 240 of these brick patio stones to get me started. All right, and here you can start to see the basket weave pattern starting to take shape. I have linked in the description below a website that offers a multitude of different free patio stone layout ideas. I found this really helpful because, again, I have no prior patio laying experience. So I wanted a layout that was going to be beginner friendly, budget friendly in terms of reducing the amount of waste from making special cuts to achieve the pattern. And overall, I just found that website really helpful, so check it out. You can also see the 2 1-inch diameter PVC pipes that I'm using to help guide the depth of my sand base. And later on in the video, I'll go over all of the different tools that I used to complete this project. So what tools did I use to complete this project? Well, first and foremost, you need a sturdy shovel. Shovel's going to be used to dig out and prepare the area for the patio. A garden rake. The garden rake was used to help just smooth out the overall area for the patio, and then it was very useful in spreading the gravel base. I purchased one 10-foot long, 1-inch diameter PVC pipe. I did take my pipe cutters to the store with me when I made that purchase, and I cut that 10-foot section down into 2 5-foot long lengths. Now, depending on the size of the area that you're working in, you may decide that you want to purchase 2 10-foot long lengths, or you may decide that you want to work with 6-foot long sections. That's just personal preference and the size of the area that you're working in. But you need at least 2 1-inch diameter segments of PVC pipe, and that will be used to help screed the sand to a 1-inch depth. You also need a 2x4 piece of wood. This was just a scrap 2x4 that I had lying around in a shed here on the property. If you don't have one lying around at your house, when you go to your big box store, you can typically find a 2x4 section of wood that's been cut down. You don't have to buy an 8 or 10-foot long section. They'll usually have pre-cut wood there. Anyway, I found a small garden shovel helpful for this project. So when I needed to add just a little bit of sand to help raise a brick or level out a small area, I found it useful. And this is a pretty common item that you can find around your house. But if you don't have one, not the end of the world. You don't need to buy one. I also used a 14-inch long concrete finishing trowel. Now this is another tool that you might be able to get away with not purchasing or using, and let me explain. So my patio has a curved section here, which means that my 2x4 did not fit when I was screeding the sand in this section, but the 14-inch finishing trowel worked perfectly in this area. If you're working with a perfect square, a rectangle, or a walkway that is not curved or bound by, I guess we'll say, barriers, then you probably don't need a finishing trowel. You can probably get away with just using the 2x4 to help screed the sand. I also used one 40-pound bucket of gray polymeric sand. This comes in both brown and gray colors. And then I also used 18 bags of Paver Sand Step 2. Let's talk about the Paver Sand real quick. So initially, I bought my Step 2 Paver Sand from Home Depot. And unfortunately, I underestimated what I needed. And when I went back to the store to buy more, they had sold out. So I had to drive over to my local Lowe's, and they sell a different brand of Paver Sand Step 2. And in all honesty, I did not prefer this as much as the sand that Home Depot sold. So this Step 2 paving sand brand is just coarser, in my opinion. It almost feels like it has like crushed gravel in it. Whereas the Step 2 paving sand that Home Depot sold feels more like beach sand. Now when you go to the store, you are going to find two different types of paving sand. There's a Step 1, which has actual rock mixed in. That can be used for your primary base if you don't want to use limestone or river rock. And then Step 2 is the layer of sand that sits on top of your base, and that's what the bricks and stones get pushed into. And then over the summer, I did have a truckload of limestone gravel dropped off. So I did use that for my base on the patio. If you don't have limestone gravel or river rock already at your house, you can buy bags of it from your big box store. I would recommend, from an economical standpoint, if you have the space to purchase limestone gravel in either a quarter or half truck increment, I would probably do that. I just think it'll cost you less money in the long run, especially if you have a local rock provider or quarry nearby. But something to keep in mind. You also will need a 40 or 80 pound tamper. My tamper is 10 inches by 10 inches. And you probably are wondering why I have a towel wrapped around mine. I will explain the thought process behind that madness in a little bit. And then finally, if the stone pattern that you choose or the area that you're working in requires cuts to the stones, then you're going to need a tool to actually make those cuts. So I already had a 18-volt rigid angle grinder here at the house. This is another tool I purchased about 2 years ago. And then for this particular project, I did purchase a 7.5-inch diamond blade that was specific for cutting cement or patio stones. If you don't have an angle grinder at your home, you can probably rent one from your big box store. You can also use a circular saw, and you can also use a hammer and chisel, although the hammer and chisel will result in a rougher finish. There are plenty of videos on YouTube that talk about how to cut bricks and patio stones, so we won't cover that too much right now. Tip number 1, check the weather forecast. Weather plays a big role in the success of this project. So when I was mapping out my timeline, I saw that we were coming out of about a day and a half of rain, followed by 8 days of rather warm sunshine. And to me, that felt ideal because, one, the ground here in Texas is very hard to dig in. So if you have any sort of project that involves excavation of soil, you want to do it following a rainfall so that you're not spending more time than you need to with a shovel. And then also, it was just going to be me working on this effort. So I knew I probably needed a couple of days to complete all of the steps properly. And I wanted to provide sufficient time for that polymeric sand to cure and bind the stones together. So depending on your soil conditions, how many people are going to be helping you, and the size of the area that you're working within, along with maybe you have some fancier, more modern tools than I do. Check the weather forecast and take that into account as you're mapping out your timeline. Tip number 2, take some time to plan your paver stone pattern and the size and style of stones that you think will be best suited for your particular project space. I think it's really easy to get caught up in the excitement of picking out a color and picking out a shape or design when you go to the store, because there's just so many available now to pick from. But what you're attracted to at the store may not necessarily be a good fit for, 1, your experience level, and 2, the area that you're working in. So for my patio, I did take some time up front to select both a pattern and a stone shape that I thought would be cost effective, result in minimal waste, and would look attractive in the area that I was working within. I will link in the description below a couple of free online resources that I leveraged in case you find those helpful as well. Tip number 3, buy more than what you think you need. So I learned this lesson not once, but twice during this project. So initially, when I was putting together my list of materials, I had used an online calculator to get an estimate of how many half cubic foot bags of paver sand I would need, along with how many bricks I would need to purchase based upon the size and shape I had selected. Now for the sand, the online calculator returned an estimate of 18 bags. And my initial reaction to that was, that's insane. There must be something wrong. There's no way I'm going to need 18 bags. Like, I don't even think I could lay end to end 18 bags of sand in this small space. So I'm pretty sure I probably only need 10, and that's what I initially bought. And like you heard earlier in the video, I ended up being wrong, and I had to waste precious time driving to 2 stores to get the remaining bags of sand that I needed. Similarly with the bricks, the online calculator returned a rough estimate of 330, and I had a very similar reaction, one filled with doubt. I looked at my space and thought, there's no way 330 bricks are going to fit in this space. Like, that must be the number I would need if I was putting in 2 patios. So I did some rough math based upon the size of the stones and figured I'll go ahead and start with 240. That should be sufficient. Wrong. Like you probably heard earlier in the video, I ended up having to go back to the store to purchase another 90 bricks because I was short. And all in all, I ended up using 320. The estimate of 330 probably would have been spot on, but I was rather conservative with how I made my cuts for the border. So I think the online calculator was accounting for more waste than what I ended up actually wasting. So trust the online calculator. Buy more than what you think you need. It will save you time and frustration. Tip number 4, buy your stones from the same palette whenever possible. Believe it or not, the color hue can vary dramatically from palette to palette that the store receives. So for example, when I went to Home Depot to buy my bricks, they had 2 palettes of the model number I was looking for. The first palette was a mix of deep charcoal and dark brick red, which is exactly what I was looking for. And the second palette was essentially a severely faded version of the first one. It looked like maybe they had run out of color at the factory. It was a dark brown and a light terracotta pink red color. So when I had run out of bricks, I was really fortunate that when I went back to the store, they just happened to have another 90 left. So I actually bought them out of that first pallet. Now, if I had gone back and they hadn't had any more, I would have been forced to come up with an alternative solution, because buying the dark brown and light pink mix would not have worked well with my patio. It would have looked like, oh, she ran out of materials and had to go back and buy something different, which is not what I wanted. So that takes me back to tip number 3. Buy more than what you think you need. You can always return materials that you don't end up using. Tip number 5, if you're able to, unload your work materials directly next to the site that you're going to be working within. I feel like this is a obvious and common sense rule, but I find myself guilty of often working harder and not smarter, and I have to remind myself, oh yeah, I could park by where I'm working and just put all of my stuff there instead of making a bunch of trips. So save your back, save some time, put your materials near where you're working. Okay, enough said on that. Tip number 6, go ahead and invest in putting down a high quality commercial non-woven fabric before you put your gravel base in. So here in Texas, we have voracious plant growth, and when it rains, we also get a lot of water. So before I put my gravel down, I not only sprayed with a commercial weed killer to kill off any remaining seeds that may have still been in the soil, but then I also put down this fabric as well. So I wanted to provide an extra good foundation to prevent any plant growth from trying to grow up between my stones, and any seeds that happen to work their way down the stones and through the gravel, they won't be able to get to the soil to resprout, because that fabric will stop it. Now you could try buying some landscape fabric from your big box store, but I think over time it's not going to hold up as well as spending a few extra dollars on a higher quality commercial non-woven fabric. Tip number 7, you want to take into account any slopes for water runoff when it rains. So we don't want any standing water on our patio or walkway. So you may find that you need to slightly elevate stones in one section to encourage the water to gradually run off towards another area. Just something to keep in mind. Tip number 8, go ahead and save your cut stone segments. I actually found this to be a time saver. So as I was making cuts to fill in the gap around my border, I found that I was actually able to just grab some of the leftover segments that I had cut off from earlier and pop them in. So it saved me some time, saved me from wasting unnecessary materials. So tip number 9 is a bit unorthodox. I will admit that. Many videos and online articles regarding the installation of paver stones will list that you need to rent a force plate compactor from a tool rental shop. And while this machine is highly convenient and it makes the tamping step very time efficient, I didn't feel like driving to my local tool rental shop, picking one up, putting it in the trailer, bringing it back, and having to pay the per hour rental fee. I also wasn't going to go purchase one because they run anywhere from $500 to $1,000 because this isn't a tool I'm going to be using every day. So I decided I was going to go ahead and just use my 40-pound 10-inch by 10-inch tamper that I had at the house, but I had to find a solution to make sure that I didn't crack the bricks because the base of the tamper is steel. So my tip was to grab a bath towel and some zip ties, and I made a blanket for the bottom of the tamper, and I was able to get the job done without breaking any of the stones on my patio. So that's tip number 9. And tip number 10 is have patience with each step of the process. Take the time to do it right. If the results didn't meet your expectations, start over with that step. Keep working on it until you feel like it's right and you're ready to move to the next step. And at the very end, do allow 1 to 3 days for the polymeric sand to cure and bond so that you're not disappointed by things shifting because weight was put on it too soon. All right, farm family, that's all I have for today's video. I hope you found this useful and a great day ahead to you all.